All right, welcome everybody. My name is Jamison Mackay. I'm the Chief Relationship Officer at Gulf Coast Educators Federal Credit Union. Welcome as we continue our speaker series. It is my pleasure to introduce Joshua Stamper, who's going to present for us today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Jamison. And it's just an honor to be a part of this speaker series with the Gulf Coast educators. And just wanted to put up this information first. So just released a book, Aspire to Lead. And this is kind of what the book is about, but then also the message from my podcast and many presentations that I've done before on this topic. So if you want to connect with me, there's a couple ways to do that, and I'll have this information at the end also. But as I'm speaking, if there's anything that you want to share out on social media, Aspire Lead is the hashtag, and then you can connect with me on Twitter or Instagram at Joshua_Stamper. And of course, all my content is on my website also at joshstamper.com. But again, I'm super excited. Hopefully everyone's had a chance to get some breakfast, get caffeinated. I got my coffee here too. That I'll be sipping on as I present. But this message, first of all, I just want to say that it's really meant for all educators, because every educator is a leader. And I want to make that really the headline of this, because it doesn't matter where you are in your role, you do make a difference every single day, and you're influencing and inspiring. And if you don't have this mindset of being a leader, then it's going to be really difficult in your position, and like I said, to make that influence. So I know that regardless of who's watching, they may think, oh, this is only for maybe a teacher aspiring to be an administrator, but that's really not the case. The book and this presentation is meant for all educators. So I need us to, as we go through this, to make sure that we have the mindset that you understand that you are making an impact and you are a leader. So with that, we're going to go into the Aspire model. So this is kind of the premises of what we're going to talk about today. And if you look at it, it looks kind of like it's supposed to be in order, almost like a timeline, and that's not the case. This is about principles that leaders need to have to make sure that they're going to the next level. So wherever you aspire to be within your leadership journey, you need to make sure that you're hitting on these different principles. So in regards to the Aspire model, it's activate, support, persevere, identify, reflect, and execute. So even though my story is going to be a timeline from point A to point B, when you're going through your leadership journey, you need to make sure that you're hitting on all of these different aspects, and it does not have to be in order. These, again, are principles. So we're going to go into activate, the first word or letter in the model. So activate, I'm going to start with a story. Early in my educational career, I was an art teacher to begin with. So my third year as an art teacher, I began coaching. And at that time, I had an assistant principal tap me on the shoulder during really just trying to get some coffee in the break room. And I was surprised by the fact that he was saying that I was making a difference on the campus as a coach, and had I ever thought about becoming an administrator someday. I actually laughed at him. Looking back, that was probably not the best response, but at the time, I was really just trying to understand what it meant to be a teacher. And it was my first year as a coach. So I was really trying to figure out what that role was to share, also being in the classroom and being on the field. So with that conversation, it really led me to try and figure out what I wanted to do in my future. I really had never thought about leadership in general, and definitely not about administration. And so because of that conversation, it really changed the trajectory of my career 100%. I went home, talked to my wife, and the conversation led to me getting into a master's program a month later. So with the Activate model, we need to start understanding what is our next steps within our career. And with that, we're going to have to start changing our mindset. We also need to do something about what we want to do. So for instance, I am an administrator now. I'm an assistant principal, and I have been for 8 years. During that time, I've had a lot of teachers come to me and say, I want to be a leader. I want to be an administrator. I want to be a counselor. I want to be a superintendent someday. Regardless of where they want to go, that conversation is letting me know, like, hey, I want to do something and I want to aspire to be something better. However, that activate piece is missing. Changing their mindset, going and doing something about it often doesn't happen. So I might have that conversation with them in my office, but I may not see them for the rest of the school year. And at the end of that school year, when they're trying to put in their application to get to the next level, then they're surprised by the response of, well, I didn't even get an interview. Why is that? And it's because they didn't activate. They didn't actually go and seek opportunities outside of their own classroom. So I'm going to speak today about being an office rat. I know that sounds not like a very endearing term, but I received that from my administration based on the things that I was doing outside of my teaching position. So like I said, every educator is a leader. As a teacher, as an art teacher, it doesn't sound like someone who would have influence on campus, but because of the things that I did outside of my classroom, outside, and got the experiences and the things that I created, I was able to begin to have that influence on the campus. And some days I felt like I had more leadership qualities and possibilities as a teacher than I do as an administrator. So I'll talk about that further as we're going through this A.S.P.I.R.E model. But the first thing is starting our journey, figuring out what we want to do next, changing our mindset and seeking those opportunities. All right, the next one is support. So in the A.S.P.I.R.E model, support, I know a lot of folks when they're in leadership, they think about support. Okay, how may I support others? And that's not what we're about. I mean, yes, we want to serve as a leader, but as far as the A.S.P.I.R.E model, it's support for us. So what does that look like? Mentorship. Okay, so support is you're looking for other leaders to help you in your journey. So for instance, coaching, getting direction, getting opportunities. A lot of folks, as I've created leadership or aspiring leadership programs, a major thing that I've heard over the years is that I don't have someone that can mentor me on my campus. What should I do? And I'm asking that you go and find someone. It might be someone else in your district. It might be someone at a different campus. It might be out of state. Finding folks to learn from, to get feedback and get opportunities. And sometimes that's not in your building. It's unfortunate, but that does occur often. So we need to make sure that we're seeking other folks to make sure that we're getting that wisdom, that insight into our lives to figure out what we're going to do, right? We talked about activate, finding the next steps, those opportunities, and you need a mentor to make sure you're doing that. So thankfully, when I was a teacher, I had an assistant principal that said, hey, my door is always open. And I know a lot of people say that, but she meant it. And so Sandra Pegram, shout out to you. She was my assistant principal at the time, gave me that opportunity. So I took full advantage of that. I went in before school. I went during my off periods. I went during my lunch after school. It didn't matter what time of day. If I had an opening, I was going down to the front office. And that's where the office rat term came from, was because I was always in the office. I was always seeking opportunities. And regardless of your position, if you are a principal and you want to be in the district office, the same thing applies. You know, you need to find a mentor, someone that's in that position. If you want to be a superintendent, well, your mentor probably should be a superintendent. That way you're being coached, given direction, given opportunities from the person that you want to learn from and want to be someday. So again, regardless of the position, it doesn't matter. You need to find a mentor that's going to help you get to that next level. So the office rat piece was just me constantly being up there, knocking on doors, saying, well, how can I help you? Obviously, administrators are really busy. They're putting out fires every single day. And so being there allowed them to give me tasks that I could take on and help them, but also help me because I was getting that experience. The other piece is the professional learning network, the PLN. And I use this through social media. So using Twitter to make connections and really build a network. So if I have a question, if I have something that I need support on, then I'm reaching out to those folks. And I mean, thankfully over the years, I've built up a network where they're all over the world at this point. And I was able to build that just to, it sounds weird, but to tweet, to DM, to be a part of Twitter chats. Voxer is another opportunity through Voxer to have conversations. That app is like walkie-talkie, if you will, or a voice message system, where you can leave a voice message for someone, they can reply back, and then you start having a conversation. So that's another way that I've built up my PLN to get support from as a teacher, but then also as administrator. All right, next one, persevere. This is really important. Obviously, if you're in leadership, you're going to get knocked down. So, it's one of those things of how you're going to pick yourself up. So as far as a mindset piece, I love this quote from Nelson Mandela: "I never lose, either I win or I learn." And this is that growth mindset piece, right? So I use this with my students, use this with my teachers. I have this quote all over my office. And the reason for that is because some days it does feel like we lose. A parent is yelling at us, a student does something incorrect. Maybe, we had a poor conversation with a teacher where maybe we weren't empathetic in that. And it feels like when you leave that you've lost. And so I just, as I said, have this as a reminder, no matter what we're doing in our life, we need to think about it as a learning experience, especially when we fail. So yes, there are days where we feel amazing, we feel like we won, but some days we feel like we lose, and we need to change that mindset so that we understand that we did not lose, we just learned from that experience. So as a teacher going in and trying to emulate being an administrator, I got new experiences, and I got to, in our district, I'm in Texas. So in Texas, there's a little bit different setup for the administration. So after you become a teacher, you become a dean of students. And what that role is that you are really responsible for all the student discipline on the campus. And as a teacher, I got an opportunity for a whole month to be in the position of the dean of students. And so with that experience, I got to, work with student discipline, work with textbooks, lockers, all of those things, keys, things that are minor pieces to administration, but I at least got my hands on that. One of the new opportunities was talking with parents and handing out student discipline. My assistant principal at the time gave me an opportunity to work with a student and call a parent. I was pretty prideful at that time. I wanted to show that I could do the job. And my assistant principal said, "Well, let me give you a little bit of background information on this parent before you call." And I was like, no, I got it. Don't worry about it. And I made the phone call. As you can imagine, the conversation did not go well after I provided what I was going to do for the student discipline. The parent was very upset, so they were going to call the superintendent, and couldn't understand what a dean of students was, and I was a fake administrator, and so on, right? So I hung up the phone, and I looked at my assistant principal, and she was just smiling, sitting at the desk, and she looked at me and said, "How did it go?" Well, of course it went terrible, and she knew that based on the fact that she was trying to give me a little bit of background information. But that experience and going through that conversation with the parent actually allowed me to understand the way I was communicating and things that I can improve to make sure that those conversations are going better. So yes, it was uncomfortable. I completely failed in that situation, but failure is natural. It's going to happen, especially when you're new in the role. So I know as educators, we want to do our best. We want to make sure that we're carrying out the best we possibly can and get the result that we want. But unfortunately, when you're new in the position and you're trying new things, your failure is just going to happen. And we need to make sure that we have that mindset, similar to the quote, that we didn't fail, we actually are learning through that experience. So the other piece is embracing the uncomfortable. I can't tell you how many uncomfortable conversations and meetings I've been in over the years. And at first, I was wondering, is this really the role I wanted to be in? And regardless of where you are as a leader, if you're an instructional coach, that's what you want to be. But you're going to have some uncomfortable conversations with teachers and student or teaching practices. If you're an administrator, you might have an uncomfortable conversation with the parent about, what their student did on the campus. Obviously, if you're in a district role, you're going to be speaking to a lot of staff members that are probably going to have some very uncomfortable conversations about potentially things that you want them to do in the future. So we have to embrace that. We have to get comfortable in that, and only through experience, by repetition, are we going to feel more comfortable in that. So we can't shy away from that. We actually have to go into and embrace the uncomfortable. So make sure that when you fail, you understand that that's a natural process, and we have to pick ourselves up and persevere through that. All right, moving on to the next piece here with identify, and this is more about identity. As an administrator, I think it's really easy to lose your identity, especially when you're moving from a teacher to an admin or admin to a district level. And I love this quote by Doug Cooper. It says, "Identity cannot be found or fabricated, but emerges from within when one has the courage to let go." And as a teacher to an admin, I had to kind of break my former identity. And with that break, I actually lost some relationships because my role started to change and the way that they viewed me started to change. And so friendships kind of faded away through that. And it was difficult, I'll be honest, but it was necessary because those conversations that I needed to have were starting to become more as far as an administrative piece, like not that I was evaluating them at the time, but as a dean of students at the time, I was having conversations about what their roles and responsibilities were, which were conversations I never had before. So for instance, if there's a classroom management issue and I needed to give them support in that, well, obviously that relationship and my role was very, very different. So the perception of my communication with them changed also, and I didn't realize that. So I'm going to give another story, another example for you. So as a teacher, kind of being in this dean role, I was presenting at a staff meeting, and I had another teacher, a peer, that also was presenting that day. So she provided her presentation and wanted some feedback. And so I gave her some feedback, and I printed out the PowerPoint slides, and I wrote some notes on there and crossed out some things. And I went to her classroom and I handed back to her this packet of notes and things that I thought could improve the presentation. I thought I was being helpful, but the way that it was perceived was extremely negative. So I went back to my classroom, and about 30 minutes on my off period, the door swung open very loudly and abrupt, and she came in and she gave me her peace of mind. And I won't repeat the things that she said, but essentially it was, "How dare you criticize my work? You're not an administrator yet, and you're not my administrator." And then she left. So with that, I understood that the perception of who I was very different. I was no longer a peer in that situation, and I needed to make sure that I understood that my identity had to change because I was viewed in this weird teacher and admin role. And at that time, I was thinking I was a peer. And so my perception of how I was communicating, I thought it was being beneficial, but for them, not just her, but for others, it was very, very different. So I needed to change the way that I was communicating to my teachers. The other piece is finding out who we are as a leader. A lot of times people have expectations and they put that upon us, and we don't want to disappoint. That's definitely what I fell into the trap of wanting to be Superman. I wanted to solve issues. I wanted to be someone who was leaned upon. But unfortunately, when I was taking on who they thought I was supposed to be as a leader, I started to lose my identity. And with that, I became disappointed in myself, honestly, and started to become, I almost burnt myself out. And I'm going to talk about that later in this A.S.P.I.R.E model and my journey. But if we're not confident in ourselves and we're not doing the initiatives and things that we want and what we believe in, then we start to be a shell of ourselves. And it's very important that we don't lose that identity moving forward. The next piece is reflect. And as you can tell in my stories, I've done a lot of reflection, especially in the writing process of my book, Aspire to Lead. And I think this is extremely important for any leader. We make thousands of decisions as educators every single day. And I actually had an opportunity to hear a speaker. They were talking about the reflection process, and there was about 1,000 people in the auditorium, and they asked, "How much time a week do you spend in reflection?" And of course, the auditorium, it was extremely silent as people were kind of mulling over that concept. And I think what the conclusion was that we don't really spend a ton of time in reflection. For myself, specifically, I can think of driving from work and back home, which is probably a 10-minute drive there and back. So that's, essentially, 20 minutes of time. And that's not a ton on the reflection process. As far as reflection goes, that's not something that we should do at the end of the process. So, I talked about the A.S.P.I.R.E model being principles, not a timeline. So we should be reflecting in all stages of our journey. I want to put some questions just as far as helpful ways to reflect, since I really want everybody that's watching right now to be able to set some time aside to reflect. And it's not a one and done situation. It's something that we need to be doing constantly. So, at the end of the day, what was done well in the process, right? What was done well in my job at the end of the day? What could I improve to make sure that the outcome is better? Did I have any biases in my decisions? And I think this is important because as a leader, there's certain things that I stay true to. There's values that I have that kind of guide me in my decision making. But sometimes that may turn into a bias, right? I want a fixed, concrete result at the end. And if it didn't happen specifically the way that I envisioned, then maybe I find that it's an outcome that is poor. However, it may serve our teachers, our students in our community in a positive manner, which is actually a win. So, sometimes in our reflection, we might have some biases in that. And then finding constructive feedback. And I think this is extremely important for any leader, is to make sure that you have people in your life that are actually going to provide honest, constructive feedback. Not just a yes, ma'am, or a yes, sir person that you have that's going to validate your decisions, even if they're the wrong decisions, but finding people that are going to push you to question your decision making. And like I said before, feeding into the uncomfortable. Those conversations are uncomfortable when you have someone pushing back saying you made potentially a wrong decision or you did something incorrectly. That's not a fun conversation. It's not a fun feeling, but is it going to make you a better leader, right? The whole iron sharpens iron piece. You need to make sure that you have people in your life, that PLN, that's going to be there for you in the tough times to give you the constructive feedback that's going to make you better as a leader. So in that reflection process, make sure that you are being honest with yourself, because that's only going to improve your skills, but then also finding a network that's going to speak truth in your life. All right, and then the execute piece, which is obviously, in my timeline was I went from a teacher to an admin, but that was a rough couple of years. It took me 3 years to, well, 2.5 to get to the next level. And going into the interview process, the first time I went to the table with area superintendents and talked a lot about what I would do, not what I did. And unfortunately, that interview didn't go very well and I didn't get the position that I wanted, right? So that was the persevere piece of determining, am I going to continue in this journey, or am I just going to hang it up and just continue to be a teacher and a coach? Thankfully, I had a new principal come in and give me some guidance and some wisdom as to what my next steps were to prove that I could do the job and go to the next level to be doing students and eventually assistant principal. And through that, I got a second chance. And I think that's an important piece there is in our execute principle, I should say, execute principle, we need to make sure that we have the keys to our preparation. So I'm going to go through this quote first, because I think this is going to set up my story for the next piece with this execute. Success doesn't necessarily come from breakthrough innovation, but from flawless execution. So preparation is key in everything that we do as far as a leader. I know a lot of people think, oh, I have to have the new and shiny piece. When I go into an interview, I need to make sure that I show, all of the brand new pieces that I've created and constructed to show that I am ready to be the next area superintendent or the next principal or assistant principal. And that's not the case. And I think that's the error that I had, is I was trying to do too much. I was trying to bring something brand new. And instead, all I needed to do is make sure that I was doing my job well and I was executing every single day, making a difference on my campus and at the district level, and making sure that I highlighted myself. So in the interview process, I know as educators, as leaders, a lot of times we don't want to lift ourselves up. We want to lift other people up. And that's important. That's what we're supposed to do. However, you also need to talk about yourself. You need to talk about all of the amazing things that you're doing on your campus every single day. You need to explain how you're executing, how you are impacting other people, inspiring other people. And, getting that second chance was extremely helpful, because when I got to the table and when I got to talk to those area superintendents again, I got to prove and talk about not what I would do, but what I had done on that campus. And we're going to talk a little bit about innovation and creativity in a little bit. And I'm going to share some of the things that I did on my campus, because yes, innovation is important, but it's not the end all be all. They want to make sure that you have the skills to be a leader, not only at the campus level, but at the district level. All right, so that's the A.S.P.I.R.E model. But before I move on to some very important aspects of leadership, I want to end with this, with execution. Vision without execution is delusion. And so we need to make sure that we have a vision. That's all the way to the beginning of our A.S.P.I.R.E model with activate, right? We need to make sure that we understand where we're going before we start the execution piece. And so execution obviously is extremely important. Reflection is too. However, we need to make sure that we always have a vision of where we want to go before we start our journey. So that is the A.S.P.I.R.E model. And just to kind of recap, I'm gonna drink some coffee real quick. So the A.S.P.I.R.E model: activate, support, persevere, identify, reflect, execute. Again, these are principles. These are not a timeline. So these are all things I think in your journey, wherever you are in education, these are things that I think you need to have to make sure that you're going to the next level. All right, so 3 different characteristics that I find important for leaders, which is empathy, passion, and creativity. And I'm going to talk about all 3 of those because when I got to the table with those area superintendents, I was able to prove that I was able to do the job and I was able to get that dean of students position. So going from an art teacher to an admin, I moved from a pretty affluent area to a Title I school. And what I found in that shift was that there were a lot of problems on my new campus that I had never, ever experienced before. And what I was doing as a dean was suspending kids left and right. We had a fight every other day. One day I suspended 21 students in one day. We were pushing kids back out in the communities with OSS, out of school suspension, and they were getting in more trouble and getting arrested in the Dallas area. And so what I found quickly was the practices and traditional things that I was doing before with students was not working and needed to be shifted and changed. And so I'm going to use this quote by Simon Sinek: empathy is being concerned about the human being, not just the output. And that piece there was really important. Was I learned quickly that I needed to teach my students the skills to be successful versus just punishing. And at the same time as being a dean of student, myself and my wife were going through a foster care process and adopting children. I have 5 kids at home. 2 are biological and 3 are adopted. And through that process of foster care, you actually have to go to training. And during the training, we got to learn through Professor Purvis at TCU about trauma-informed care. What was insightful about that was we started to learn how to parent differently, but I also was wondering how I could translate that information as a administrator. And what I found was restorative practice. It was something I hadn't really learned about before, but in essence, it's finding ways for students to rectify issues that they're having and to restore relationships. And it changed my outlook completely. Talking about that identity piece, right? I was taking on too much as a dean of students. I was, like I said before, being Superman and trying to put out fires. And unfortunately, those fires were putting me out. And I almost walked away from education as a whole because of that, because what I was doing with detentions, ISS and OSS, were not working. In fact, it was making things worse. The student behavior was getting worse. And I needed to make a shift, right? So with that shift, I redid the discipline matrix, and we created a relationship action team. So that team really focused on how we could shift the way consequences were provided to students, and finding opportunities for kids to learn and reflect on the decision making, and then also create a plan to restore whatever was broken. So if it was a computer, or stealing something, or just having, you know, a rough conversation with a teacher, maybe it was them saying something extremely negative, you know, finding ways to restore that relationship. So that's the piece with empathy that I learned, which also coincides with teachers, right? The communication strategies. How are we able to understand that our teachers are going through really, really tough times, and there are things that are going on in their lives that are being carried onto our campus that may determine how they function every single day. And so having empathy as leader to have those crucial conversations with them, but then understanding that they might need some grace to be the best version of themselves. And as a leader, a lot of times empathy is seen as a weakness, and I want to assure you that it's not. It's a strength, and it's something that's going to benefit you every single day, and it's something we need to tap into. So I think this is one of the 3 characteristics that I think every leader should possess. The next one is passion. So passion makes us stronger than we are. Love makes us better than we are. Be passionate about the things that we love. And so with that, a lot of times we think of being a leader that we have to be 100% only focused on our position on a campus, on our district. And if that's the case, burnout probably will happen. And like I said before, I almost walked away from the profession, and I needed something to fill my cup, because I was pouring out every single day on other people, and I was getting extremely exhausted. And so what I found was, you know, and maybe this is my art background, but I needed to find ways to create. I needed to find something to do that was going to enhance myself and be a project. And so this is the passion project idea. I have a blog on my website about this, but this was kind of one of the other pieces that was the turning point for me as a leader, was finding ways to create and then to share that creation out. And that's what landed with my podcast. So I have a podcast. I've been doing it 3+ years, called A.S.P.I.R.E, the Leadership Development Podcast. And that was developed because that PLN, right? I met Todd Neslony. He's the author of Kids Deserve It. I got to go down and see his campus in Navasota, Texas, and meet with him. When I got there, he was actually recording with Adam Welcome, the Kids Deserve It podcast, and they were running it through YouTube. And so I snuck in and I sat down and I just kind of watched the magic. And if you've ever seen Todd speak, he does a marvelous job. After that was done, I peppered him with a ton of questions, because I had just finished a aspiring leadership program for my district that went so well that the district took it over. And I was longing to work with aspiring leaders. And so after that conversation, I was determined to create a podcast. It took about 5 months to actually have the courage to actually push record and to get everything ready. But after that conversation, I realized that I needed something to pour out into other people, to create and to share. Now, by no means am I telling everybody that's watching to create a podcast. That's not what it's about. It's about finding something that you love and finding a way to continue to create, to take some time for yourself that's outside of school, outside of your position, that you can pour into, so that way it can pour into yourself, which is going to impact those that you serve. So it's really important that you find that item, whatever it may be. But I just, for mental health purposes, I just think every leader needs to have something that they're passionate. And if it's something that does correlate to the campus, great. But just find what you love, because if you don't, you're going to get too far into the busyness of the job, which is going to break you down, honestly. And it did for me. So this was something that I think all folks need to have. Last piece is the creativity. Okay. I think often we just get into the tradition of education, and what was done yesterday is what we're going to do tomorrow. And what I charge you with today is that as a leader, ask for suggestions. Okay. Just because you're a leader doesn't mean that you need to have all of the solutions to all problems. That's not what your job is about. You need to ask others, get their impact. The other piece to it is when people come with suggestions, with ideas, even if they're crazy, say yes. A lot of times leaders get in the way of amazing ideas, and they may seem odd. You may not understand the logistics of it, but that's not the problem. The problem is finding a solution that's going to be best for everyone. So yes, ask for suggestions from other people, but then also say yes to the crazy ideas. Once you get those crazy ideas, or any idea, right? If you're doing a brainstorming session, praise folks for creating something. Oftentimes people come with problems, but not solutions. So why wouldn't we want to praise those who are coming up with great ideas? And then as far as how you might get those great ideas, this is a program that I created. This is something as a teacher I created and then brought to multiple campuses. It's what's called Creative Corner. And this was kind of a brainstorming idea or session that teachers had an opportunity to be a part of, and it was teacher-led. So every month we had a space that we designated for the Creative Corner. Everyone got PD or professional development time that was required by the state that we would give them as a campus. And they would share different concepts and ideas to other people about instructional practices. It could be about technology, it could be about group activities, it didn't matter, assessment, whatever, but it was them bringing new ideas, new things that they had been doing in the classroom, but sharing it out to the masses. So that way other people could gain those same concepts and then implement them in their own classroom. And the collaboration was amazing. It was one of my favorite times of the month. It totally was uplifting. But the thing was I wasn't the one solving the problems for the campus. It was my teachers being able to share that out and giving them the space to have a voice in that. And a lot of times they were odd solutions to problems, but it was amazing. It was great. And it gives other people ownership of how to improve the campus and the district. So not to say that everyone needs to create a creative corner, but again, creativity is something that needs to be harnessed. It needs to be fostered. It's not going to happen by itself. So we need to make sure that we're putting things in place on our campus to make sure that we're growing that and not getting in the way of creativity. All right. I'm going to kind of end on this. Leadership is not a position or a title. It is an action and example. Like I said, as a teacher, a lot of times I felt like I had a great influence, even though my title technically was art teacher and coach. I was able to do a lot of different things and have a great influence, building a mentorship program, building a Creative Corner, finding peer-to-peer tutoring programs that I built on there. So there were a lot of things that I had my hands in, but I was just a teacher, right? And that's the thing is no one's just a teacher, no one's just an educator. Everyone is a leader, like I said. So it's about action and making sure that we're being the best example possible for everyone in our organization. All right, with the A.S.P.I.R.E model, if you want to learn more, I've got a book that was released in September called A.S.P.I.R.E to Lead with Empathy, Creativity, and Passion based on what I said today. There are a lot more stories in there, a lot more examples. I've also got different author contributions. I have 11 different authors that are in there. There's some QR codes that link to some different podcasts also from my podcast, A.S.P.I.R.E, the Leadership Development Podcast. If you're looking for free information, if you want to hear about other amazing educational leaders, the podcast is there for you. You can find that on any podcast application. And then if you want to reach out to me, if you want to connect in any way, my website, joshchamber.com, or through the different social media outlets. I'm also a part of the Teach Better team, and we do a lot of free PD. There are blogs, there's a podcast network, which I'm in charge of. There's a speakers network. There's a lot of different components. There's YouTube. So whatever you're looking for, there's a lot of free resources at teachbetter.com. So I definitely hope that you go there to, regardless of where your educational position is or where it lies, the Teach Better team can help you. So with that, Jameson, I think I'm finished, but I do appreciate this opportunity.
Well, thank you, Joshua. You know, your message is great, not just for educators, but I think leadership in general. And we appreciate you being on, and thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining.